we were eating a couple bars and then a meal, essentially our body was taking that whole meal. Even I remember like vividly ordering steamed vegetables and a piece of fish, also steamed, like very plain,
right.
Whatever. Even though it was steamed fish and steamed vegetables, my body was storing it as fat.
Right. Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jen Trepic, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jen Trepic. I'm here with my friend Lauren.
Hi, everyone.
Lauren and I know each other from working out. I actually think the first time we met was a class on a Sunday afternoon where
we were the only two.
Right, we were the only two people in the class. I had a crazy night out, so I had canceled my morning and came late. We were the only two. I was like, can we just do a stretch class instead?
Right. And no, we didn't do a stretch class.
No, it
was a very hard class.
Right, especially with only two of us in
Right,
it.
but we ended up chatting for a while after the class and realized we had a lot in common.
Yeah, so anyway, here we are. Now Lauren's joining us. So today's topic is the 5 fat factors. And in my over 10 years of practice as an optimal health coach, and I have a specialty in weight management, this is sort of the underpinning, or these 5 things are the underpinning of everybody's story before we start. And so I think for a lot of us, it's the underpinning of our food life. Whether food's an issue for you or not, we live in this world where everyone's talking about this fad diet or that, or, like what are the things right now? There's keto,
right?
Whole30.
I've oddly been seeing a lot more commercials for Atkins again.
Yes, because Atkins and keto are essentially the same thing.
Right.
Sorry to burst everybody's bubble. Been there, done that. We all did it.
But things like that, like Slim Fast, those things have been around for so long.
Jenny Craig, Weight Watchers, all the things. And over the fads too, there's been the sugar-free movement. Then there was the fat-free thing.
Right.
Then, and a lot of times now it's like the gluten-free thing.
People just, are vegan. Some people, of course, for health reasons, but others for, weight management or other reasons.
Yeah, so we all sort of have our plan and things that we stick to, or things that we're just trying because maybe we don't know.
Right.
And one of the things I always tell people is that any diet will work. All of these plans work. If you follow it, it will work. The question becomes, how long-term is it? And how healthful is it? And that's really what starts to differentiate different plans. So most of us have done, so the first fat factor is this idea of yo-yo dieting, right? It's the fad diets that we were all talking about. They help us lose weight, right? But for the most part, we don't keep it off because, right, that's the yo-yo. We take it off and gain it back. Because what happens is losing weight following a lot of these diets, calorie restriction, cutting out whole food groups, all of these kinds of things cause our body to respond in such a way that, especially cutting calories and especially cutting out whole food groups, our body says, I need to survive, right? I'm sure you guys have all heard people talking about survival mode, right? Our body goes into this survival mode. Right. And so in order to support itself, your body actually will lose the weight. So the number on the scale will change, but we're actually losing water and muscle because your body is actually using its own muscle to fuel itself because it's not getting enough fuel from our food intake. So what happens is that we lose this weight as water and muscle. And now because the food plan that we've been following is not sustainable, we can't survive on it forever, it ends at some point.
Right, we reach a plateau, yeah.
Right, we go back to our old eating habits, or maybe it's not even a plateau. Maybe it's like, I had an event, and then all hell broke loose, and there went the whole thing, and now I'm off, right? This on-off conversation many of us have had in our lives.
Well, but that's another reason it's not sustainable, right? Because if you can't follow this plan or this diet, whichever we're choosing to call it,
right,
then, it's not something that you can continue to follow when you have, say a date or a wedding or an event or, right?
Exactly. So then we gain this weight back. But now when we go to gain it back, because what we lost was water and muscle is metabolically active.
Right.
So now we go back to these old eating habits that probably are not healthful to begin with, which is why we were looking for the diet in the first place. But we have less muscle on our body to be burning fuel.
Right.
So over time, we're gaining the weight back with less muscle on our body. So if you were to look at body composition, we're actually fatter, even if the scale says the same number. Because we
right,
lose weight as water and muscle and gain it back as fat. Lose weight as water and muscle, gain it back as fat.
Right. And then isn't your body, this is another question for you, isn't your body then in that case, not, I don't know if it's in a state of recovery, but it's always sort of overworking or working harder than it has to be, right? Because
either that or it's not working at all.
Okay.
Because in survival mode, it says I have to shut down all functions other than survival.
Okay.
Which means it slows your metabolism, it slows all these other bodily functions to stay alive.
Okay.
So essentially you're at one extreme or the other, whether you're overworking,
right,
or your body is shut down and it's not working at all.
Right. So then from there, let's say you abandon this diet and go back to the way you're eating before you tried it in the first place. Then wouldn't the challenge be to sort of even get back to your old baseline, right? Or to restabilize your body?
Yeah, so exactly. And so we'll kind of get to that at the end of today about like what do we do and how do we move forward?
Right.
Right. So ultimately it's about eating for nutrition.
Right.
Committing to exercise and activity and making that a part of your life because muscle dictates metabolism, right? We need to build muscle.
Right.
And a commitment to changing the behaviors on a daily basis
right,
that got us to where we were to begin with.
Right.
You know?
And right, consistency is key, right, with all things, yeah.
Exactly. So, number 1 fat factor, yo-yo dieting. Number 2 fat factor is crash dieting. And the implication is similar to the yo-yo effect, right? But crash dieting is severely cutting calories, cutting out whole food groups. It's that, oh no, I have a reunion in a week, or I have to put on a bathing suit next Sunday, or, right, there's some event coming up and it's your juice cleanses. It's, there was one diet years ago called the pregnant pea diet. I don't know if you guys remember this.
I do not remember this.
You drink, essentially the theory behind it was that there's a hormone in the urine of pregnant women that is supposed to be or rumored to be, helpful for your metabolism. So essentially you would be taking like this hormone or whatever it is.
Interesting.
And then you would eat like very little.
Huh.
There was another one, my mom and I did this. It was through a hospital.
Okay.
In my hometown, where essentially it was a couple bars and then 1 meal a day.
Okay.
And it totally messed me up because of course it wasn't sustainable. And then I really believe it was like after that one where I felt like I would just breathe and gain weight. Yeah, I mean, it was like
right. That's sort of like the Slim Fast approach, isn't it? Like you're sort of supplementing with their products, and then you're eating like one balanced meal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know a lot about it, but I know it's been around for a long time, and but I think that's sort of the way it works.
And this whole thing of crash dieting is exactly that. Like, it's not sustainable. So the crash dieting is putting our body, literally throwing us into survival mode. Where, as we were just saying before,
right,
essentially your metabolism slows down to a snail's pace.
Right.
Because it's focused on making sure that your heart works and your brain works and,
right,
it's not worried about the sugar.
Right.
Or the protein or,
My question was going to be, what is the impact on your organs? Just sort of on your essential bodily functions then of doing something like that.
Right.
Like for someone, maybe for sensitive populations, right? For someone who might have something else going on, but they've decided to try a crash diet or a fast or a cleanse or whatever for some reason, then what would the implication be of doing that if they had something else medically going on?
Yeah, I mean, depending on what it is, and you could totally do a deep dive into this.
Of course, right.
Entirely. But essentially, your metabolism is shutting down to make sure that your organs function.
Right.
But everything is functioning at the minimum to survive. It's not functioning for life and thriving and energy and, so a lot of times, speaking of that, a lot of times with crash dieting and throwing off your metabolism like that, people experience like lethargy, right? Like I'm not eating enough, and your body is like, look, you having energy is the last thing on my mind.
Right.
I need to make sure that your heart pumps.
Right. Well, because what gives us energy? Food. Right.
Right, exactly. So, and the other thing, with crash dieting and yo-yo dieting and sort of your organs and these effects, so there's hormones around hunger and satiety. Mm-hmm. So leptin is the hormone that tells our body when we're satisfied. Ghrelin is the hormone that tells us we're hungry. So consistent calorie restriction actually keeps your ghrelin really, really high. So a lot of times with calorie restriction, people be like, oh, I'm always hungry. Right? Well, duh. Because your body, you are hungry. And that consistently high levels of ghrelin throws us into that survival mode as well. Right. And then the consequence of that too is that just like we can become resistant, that's the word, sorry, my brain stopped working. So just the way we can become resistant to different hormones in the body, like insulin resistance is diabetes, right? We can actually become resistant to the hormones leptin and ghrelin.
Right.
So what happens then is that your body is producing this hormone, but the receptor sites in the brain have essentially shut off.
Right.
So people experiencing this will have high serum levels of these hormones, meaning the hormone is floating around in their blood.
Right.
And not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Right. What I was going to mention too, when years ago I was working at an eating disorder facility, and this is something that came up a lot with patients, particularly patients who were suffering with anorexia, right? Because after so much time of them sort of engaging in restricting behaviors, they would often, self-report, they just weren't feeling hungry anymore.
Right.
So I'm sure initially they were, but that was not really when we were working with them. So we didn't know what they were feeling then. But when it became really a medical issue and their body weight was so low, and of course restricting behaviors were still going on, they would say, I don't even feel hungry.
Right.
So that's sort of...
It's exactly the same thing. And what happens too when we're sort of in this survival mode with crazy low calorie stuff, or whatever, our body actually said, think back to caveman.
Right.
Right? Our body says, it's a time of famine. I have to figure out how to survive. Survival in the future is I have to store everything I get because I don't know when the next meal is coming.
Right.
Well, fuel stored to be used later is fat.
Right.
So again, we're actually, so like that diet where we were eating a couple bars and then a meal, essentially our body was taking that whole meal. Even I remember vividly ordering steamed vegetables and a piece of fish, also steamed, very plain, whatever. Even though it was steamed fish and steamed vegetables, my body was storing it as fat.
Right.
Because it was I don't know when the next meal is coming. This is actual nutrition. I need to hold on to this.
Right.
So again, it also goes back to that body composition thing where we're gaining it back as fat.
Right.
And holding on to everything we get.
Right. Well, and I think that's sort of what made me ask the question earlier, how does your body, or how long might it take your body, to sort of get back to its baseline if this is something you have decided to do? Because if you had even remotely healthy behaviors before, or, you ate everything in sort of moderation, right? So then if you sort of veer off and you do something like this, whether it's yo-yo or crash dieting, and your baseline prior to doing that was eating everything in moderation for the most part, then how difficult would it be, or how long would it take your body to return to its baseline? And would that matter with age? Would that, right, how
Sure.
difficult would that process be?
Yeah, so that process is to be consistent, as we said before, but to be consistent eating nutrition, eating to balance your blood sugar so that your body is never in a fat storage mode.
Okay.
So this is sort of getting into another topic, which we will do an episode about. When our blood sugar is too high because we've chosen inappropriate foods, or we went to the restaurant and started with the bread basket.
Right.
Or what, or we've eaten too much of the good stuff, can happen too. Or our blood sugar is too low, our body is storing everything as fat.
Okay.
So if you keep your body in this middle zone,
right,
your blood sugar in this middle zone by choosing foods that support nutrition,
right,
choosing foods that keep your blood sugar balanced, eating regularly throughout the day, when you're consistent in that, you're never in those fat storage modes.
Okay.
And over time, your question is how long? And really that depends on each person.
Right.
But over time, your body will realize that it's never a time of famine and release those fat stores.
Okay.
It will. And there's actually research now. They used to say that once you had a fat cell, you always had a fat cell. It could shrink, but it never goes away. There is research now that you can remove fat cells.
Right.
And there are things we can do to help that. But so it is possible, and it requires being consistent long enough for your body to realize that it doesn't need these stores. It's never a time of famine.
Right.
Like if only they realized it was a refrigerator full of food we're choosing not
right,
to eat.
Right.
Like, if only it worked that way.
Right.
Okay, so third...
It's protecting itself until it doesn't have to protect itself anymore.
Exactly.
It's sort of like the... Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Well put. Thank you. Yeah.
That was the non-medical simplified version,
Yeah.
right.
Perfect. Okay, so the third fat factor is sedentary lifestyle.
Right.
And we all know this. Really, our bodies were not designed to sit at desks. Our bodies were not designed, our bodies also weren't designed to go work out like a maniac for 1 hour a day.
Right.
The way that we add exercise into our lives is also sort of inhuman to some degree.
Right.
Right?
Well,
So, yeah.
I think, but to add to that point, and I've shared with you before conversations I've had with my grandparents, who I'm blessed that they're still alive and healthy, 93 and 94, but they have a tremendous amount of wisdom from when they were young. And, the world has changed so much. So people are working unbelievably long hours, which was not the case a long time ago. Just generally lifestyles are very different. And that doesn't always allow for people to choose to not be sedentary.
Right.
So I think that sort of plays a role in, a lot of the choices people make when it comes to food, but also when it comes to exercise.
Yeah. And we sort of overcompensate. At least I think this varies by geography and certain demographics for sure. Definitely New York City, I see it a lot, where we sort of overcompensate for the sedentary and go crazy in our workouts or whatever, and I'm guilty of it.
Right.
But really a couple interesting statistics. 31% of Americans are getting adequate exercise.
Oh, that's actually higher than I thought it would be.
Yeah. 40% are getting none at all.
Oh, okay. I take that back then.
These are according to the CDC.
Okay.
Also. And a few years old. So it also could have changed.
Okay.
To be honest, I doubt it's changed for the better.
Right.
But, so 40% are getting none at all. 31% are getting adequate exercise. So it leaves us with about 29% of people who are maybe doing something.
Right.
But it's really not enough. And so, we have to be physically active.
Right.
For our body to use fuel.
I think
our brain uses fuel, but it's more than just our weight.
Right.
It's really overall every organ,
Right.
every
The heart.
bone, exactly. And we say too all the time, and you guys will hear this from me all the time, muscle dictates metabolism.
Right.
You want to eat food, you want to enjoy dessert, you want to do all those things, you need muscle on your body.
Right.
You know, muscle is metabolically active when you're breathing, when you're sleeping, when you're doing nothing, when you're sitting on the couch. Muscle is metabolically active.
Right.
So muscle dictates metabolism. The only way we build muscle is through exercise and activity.
Right.
But even to your point of, you know, your heart and, you know, our overall health, like we have to move our bodies.
Right.
And so, of course, you guys know I'm going to say this. We have an episode coming up that's all about exercise and how do you choose the right kind of exercise and how do you know, what's the secret to it all?
Right.
What do we do?
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask that, but I'll save it.
Right. But, you know, I guess to give you something to do right now, build muscle.
Right.
Focus on building muscle. The purpose of cardio is really to use your heart as a muscle.
Right.
It's a very important muscle.
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest misconceptions around exercise is that cardio for weight loss.
Right. Is that, well, cardio is king, I think, was sort of the misconception for so long. And I think that went back a little bit like to the 80s and 90s with some of the fad diets too, where it was just like, you know, get your heart rate up and run and, you know, do all of this crazy stuff. Whereas I think now a lot of those misconceptions have sort of been busted. And now people have a little bit more, education and certainly more options, at least without question for us, you know, in New York, we have a tremendous amount of options when it comes to exercise.
Yeah. And if you're in a location, you know, region of this country where there's maybe fewer options, there's a million things on the internet, but focus on building muscle. It doesn't mean you have to go lift weights. You can use your own body.
Right.
Your own body weight as resistance, but you have to build muscle.
Right.
Okay, I think we've exhausted that one.
Right.
So the next fat factor, so that was sedentary lifestyle. The next fat factor is garbage in. And this is probably one of my like soapbox things. Yeah. And this is the fact that we are a country of people who are overfed and undernourished. So what that means is we are eating food all day long. We eat a lot of what we think is food.
Right.
But we're always hungry because our body is searching for nutrients. So there's a lot of processed food. We eat foods out of bags and out of windows. We eat a lot of what we call food-like substances that don't actually offer nutrition. So our body is overfed and undernourished. And when we're not getting the nutrients, our body keeps saying, give me food.
Right.
Right? Like what turns off that hunger is nutrition.
Right.
But if what's coming is never nutritious,
right, then
you always sort of have that going. And then the other side of it too is a lot of our processed foods, you know, what was it? Pringles? That was like, you can't eat just one.
Oh, yeah.
Is that Pringles?
Yep.
Right. Well, that's chemical.
Right.
Right. All of these food manufacturers put stuff in their food, chemicals in the food that turn off those hormones that tell us when we're satisfied.
Right.
So it's all chemical.
Right.
And part of it comes from choosing these foods where, and even sometimes, you know, we think we're making a really great choice, like certain fruits and certain vegetables, but the reality is our fruits and vegetables don't have the same nutrition as your grandparents' fruits and vegetables.
And that's, you know, when you said, you know, this is sort of a soapbox thing, my grandmother talks about this all the time, that, you know, when they were growing up, when, you know, when my mom and my aunt were young, you know, the ingredients that she would buy to cook with don't look anything like those same ingredients do today. So whether it's pesticides or, you know, her joke is like, look at this strawberry. It doesn't even look like a strawberry. You know, it's 10 times bigger. But she also says that things don't taste as good as they used to. So I think it's probably a combination of things, but, you know, I think all of those things certainly contribute to the amount of, you know, nutrition or nutrients, right, that we're getting from eating the same things that have changed over time because of, you know, how they're being produced.
Exactly. And so this also brings up the argument of like a great multivitamin and things like that.
Right.
But the point is paying attention to the nutrition.
Right.
Often more than the calories. I would argue always more than the calories, because a calorie is not a calorie, right? You could eat 100 calories of M&Ms or you could eat 100 calories of an apple.
Right.
Your body is going to have very different responses.
Right.
Your health is going to be very different, and that's a calorie is not a calorie.
Right.
If it were that simple, why would anyone have a problem?
Right. That's
So,
true.
you know. Anyway. All right. And then the last fat factor is stress and adrenal fatigue. And I mean, hard pressed to find a person who's not stressed.
I was going to say, we know that all too well.
Right. Exactly. And the thing is, it's similar to fat, right? Our body's response of storing fat to be used later to survive in times of famine is survival.
It's like fight or flight, right? It's the same sort of...
So the stress, exactly. So the stress response is the same thing. It's survival. But it was designed for survival to be acute. So, for example, I actually saw this on the news the other day. Somebody, I don't know what state this was in, somebody was being chased by a bear on a hiking path.
Oh my gosh.
And his quote was, "I've never ran faster in my life."
Right.
And it was like, exactly.
Right. I was going to say,
that's the
he's
point.
right. He hasn't.
You're
Yeah.
right. Your body will come up with all of
Right.
the fuel to propel you away from the bear.
Right.
And once the bear was gone, the man could breathe and all of the cortisol and all these stress
Right.
hormones subsided, you know? But the reality is, how often does that happen?
Right.
Right? It was so notable to me because it was a bizarre story.
Right.
But now our stressors are constant. And so our body is in a constant survival mode, a constant stress response. And that's actually really detrimental to our health. So
Right.
like this physiological response that was designed to save our lives is now killing us.
Right.
And I mean, I wish I could put it a different way, but
No,
it's kind of
it's-
the truth.
right.
And I mean,
Well,
it is the truth.
But, you know, I think everything you said ties in, right? We're talking about how environmental change has changed our food, how we're working longer hours, how we're not able to exercise, right? So all of these things have sort of impacted our lives in a way. They've sort of all, I want to say work together, but that is too positive, right? But they've all worked together to cause a tremendous amount of stress, and then it's this vicious cycle of you know, all of these components that are really causing this adrenal fatigue, and everything together has this, you know, very long-term detrimental impact on our bodies.
Exactly. And I think part of the challenge with it too is the fact that our stressors now are not physical. You know,
Right.
like think about, have you ever like thought about something and gotten butterflies?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's a physical response
Right.
to something mental.
Right.
And so our stressors today are very much mental versus physical.
Right.
And therefore constant and ever present.
Right.
And
Well, and I think in addition to work, right, and family obligations, finances, all this stuff going on, I think, right, just sort of the state of the world, the state of our city, right? And when you said, you know, butterflies, I had to turn off the debates the other night because I said this is like too stressful to watch. I have to just sort of remove myself from it. And I think that's something that in a lot of cases we're not able to do when you're talking about stress with respect to work or to, you know, certain situations. That's something that you can't walk away from, right?
right. And even
Like the bear.
Right, like the bear. And even our ability to unplug.
Right.
To turn off this response.
Right.
Is so challenging. We have our phones. We watch TV before we go to bed. You know, our version of unplugging or relaxing is very different than your grandmother's version of
right.
relaxing.
Right.
And it all sort of piles on.
Right.
And so I think that's a big piece of this movement. I see a big movement toward this idea of self-care. Mm-hmm. And a lot of self-care is nutrition and supplementation and things like
Right.
that. But
And
also unplugging and meditation and figuring out how to do that and what that
Right.
looks like for you. And maybe what, for me, that looks like my exercise.
Right.
But, you know, we all have to find what that is for us, and that's also another deep dive that
Right.
someone could do.
But
and
there's a
things to
challenge in that
explore
too, I
over
think.
time.
You know, for each person to find what that means for them. And I think that
sometimes that's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, what that means for them and what works, and you know, how do you,
Yeah.
Like, I have a hard time with yoga because that whole think about nothing thing, not happening for me. I need you to distract me to the point that I can't think about something
Anything else, right.
But, yeah, and I think those are also things, guys, that we'll continue to explore and talk to different experts in different modalities so that we can figure out, like, what's the right thing for me? Because that's probably definitely going to be different than what's right, or even the right combination of things.
Right. It's not just one thing for everybody.
Right. So, all right, so quick recap. Our 5 fat factors. We have yo-yo dieting, crash dieting, sedentary lifestyle, garbage in, and stress and adrenal fatigue. So what do we do? Right, and we kind of overviewed this at the beginning, and we've talked about things throughout about what we can do. But the bottom line is choose foods for nutrition. Find a way to put exercise and activity into your daily routine, and have a commitment to improving the habits, the daily habits that created the situation we were in, and doing things differently and figuring out kind of what those habits are and where, which of these factors, is the biggest challenge for you.
Right.
And focus on one. I think that's the other thing is you don't need to focus on every single one of these. Find the one that's playing the biggest factor in your life.
Right.
And explore a handful of solutions around it so that you can figure out how to make this work.
Right.
And ultimately, as you continue to listen to this podcast, we are going to explore all of these things and how do we get to the bottom of it and different ways to handle all of these 5 fat factors.
Awesome.
Yeah. So hopefully it's given you a little bit of insight for everybody into sort of how we got here.
Right.
Right. And some stuff that we can do. I always want to make sure that you have something actionable that you can do right now.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you again, Lauren.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed it.
Awesome. And we'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.